there's a huge difference. I've explained this in great detail in the first volume of my work, To Deceive the Elect, that according to the Church's canonical tradition, there is the jurisprudence of the Roman Church, which is establishes the canonical doctrine of the Catholic Church. The criteria that are to be applied for judging heretics and those who are suspected of heresy. And they have to be rigorously applied according to the proper definition of heresy. And formal heresy, a person can be judged to be a formal heretic if he, with full knowledge, were to make, to assert an opinion contrary to an article of faith. So if he were to make this assertion with pertinacity, in other words, he is consciously aware of being in heresy, and with full knowledge that he is professing a doctrine that is contrary to the dogma of faith, then that one is a formal heretic and is judged to be so. Anything short of that, there are degrees of suspicion. There is mild suspicion of heresy. There is grave suspicion of heresy, vehement suspicion of heresy. There is a violent suspicion of heresy. And these are what are called the indicia. The indicia are the words and actions that constitute the evidence of heresy. Those are the indicia of heresy. And those indicia determine the qualification of the individual as to what degree is he considered suspect, or if he is simply considered to be a formal heretic. Now, the indicia of formal heresy, which are very strict, in the tribunals of the Holy Inquisition down through the centuries, have very strictly applied, and they've established these criteria, and they have applied them to judge when someone is a formal heretic and when someone is a suspect of heresy, and how that suspicion is to be resolved one way or the other. Either the person is found to be a formal heretic and obstinate, and they're condemned as heretics and excommunicated, or else they can be moved to repentance, and they will be repentant heretics and no longer heretics, and they can return to the faith. These judgments have to be made according to the canonical standards, and those are the indicia established by the Church's canonical tradition. With Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul the 6th, Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict the 16th, there are propositions that they have made and actions that they have committed that unfortunately make them fall under suspicion. They did fall under suspicion. When there is suspicion of heresy, as there was in these cases, in a penal process, the accused, the one who is charged with the crime of heresy, is presumed guilty, and he must defend himself and present evidence to show otherwise, that he's not a formal heretic. That is when the accused is summoned by the proper authority, summoned before the tribunal, accused and charged with the crime of heresy, and he is given the opportunity to defend himself. In that case, the one is presumed guilty until he can show otherwise. That's for the penal process. But for the tacit renunciation of office, which is not a merely ecclesiastical law, as was formulated in the 1917 Code of Canon Law. The 1917 Code of Canon Law formulated this canon precisely because it was the unanimous teaching of the ancient fathers. It was proven to be so by St. Robert Bellarmine, and it's also proven by St. Thomas Aquinas, and I've given all the relevant quotations in my books, in my 2 volumes. that if a person is a public heretic, all ecclesiastical office is lost. He ceases to hold office. As Pope St. Celestine I ruled in the question of Nestorius, because Nestorius, as Bishop of Constantinople, had issued excommunications and such, condemnations, excommunications against priests and bishops and such who were under his jurisdiction, who would be under the jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Constantinople. But the one problem there, he was a heretic. And Pope St. Celestine ruled that from the time he first began to preach heresy, he had no power whatsoever to excommunicate anyone. It was later found, maybe it wasn't evident at first that he was obstinate and knowingly committing the crime of heresy, but it had to be, upon a little bit of reflection, it had to be obvious that he was a heretic. And a dogma of faith is already a dogma, as Pope Pius VI pointed out in his encyclical Super Solidaritate. It doesn't become a dogma when the Pope defines ex cathedra, or when the council solemnly defines with the authority of the Pope. He refers to the dogma of the primacy. Now, this is in the late 1700s, a century. This is a full century before Vatican I solemnly defined the primacy of the Pope. Pope Pius VI spoke of the dogma of the primacy being a dogma of the faith, because it's a dogma of the ordinary universal magisterium of the Church. Cardinal Pallavicino explained very clearly about how the saints would have been acting very unjustly and wrongfully if they were to have condemned these people who were in heresy, if they weren't really heretics, if it was not yet a dogma of the faith. But the popes and the saints, the doctors of the church, they condemned these heretics even before the solemn definition, because they understood that these are already definitions of faith.
Wow.
So that must also be taken into consideration. When the church condemns a heretic, we don't have to wait for a solemn definition. When there is a clear, undoubtful, certain, absolutely certain dogma of the universal faith of the church, then one is judged to be a heretic, even before the solemn definition is made. So there were some who condemned Nestorius before the church defined it by papal authority. But it was already a dogma beforehand. It was a dogma of the universal faith of the church. Nestorius had no excuse. He was a heretic. And so the malice of his heresy, the pertinacity, is something that was evident from the beginning, and it should have been evident from the beginning. The Pope made it clear that he was a formal heretic, and he had lost all authority to make any condemnation, any excommunication, even from the very beginning when he first pronounced his heretical opinions, even before the church made the solemn and definitive pronouncement infallibly through the Pope. So that's why even a heretic who pronounces against the universal magisterium of the church is judged to be a heretic.
Father, I have a question. Everything is pretty much a mess. Archbishop Vigano stated a couple days ago, or maybe yesterday, this is beyond human repair. This is something essentially only God's going to be able to fix, clearly. But here's my question. To me, we're living the warning of Fatima. Our Lady of Fatima actually, she gave us warnings at La Salette and Fatima, that we're living now And nobody seems willing to look to Fatima for answers. To me, that's where they are. That's where the answers to all this mess is. It's not something we're gonna be able to fix with our hands, save except for this. Okay. But you
Yes.
can't, but people are not interested. They're not, everyone seems to have their own answer. A certain cardinal told me that they had gone all through Rome and all their confreres trying to see if there was any interest in Fatima at all, and he could not find one. What
The
is
third
why
secret
are
of
we not
Fatima.
all on the same page here?
The third secret of Fatima simply upholds the dogma of faith, what is in scripture and in tradition, and what has been repeated again and again in Marian apparitions. It was Pope Benedict XVI, who as a cardinal explained this. The third secret of Fatima, as Malachi Martin said, is the most significant event in the church in the 20th century. The third secret of Fatima speaks about someone who would apparently be a pope, who would be completely under the power of the devil. I asked Malachi precisely on this question. I said, according to my study, the third secret of Fatima reveals that there will be a heretic who will be an anti-pope. And Malachi, who received the secret from Cardinal Bea, said, were it only that. Now, it will be someone who appears to be pope, a putative pope, to use the theological term, is a putative pope, one who is believed to be pope, but who is not, in fact, qualified to be pope, and therefore not a pope.
Oh, wow.
A heretic is not a pope. A heretic is not the pope. And today, the fearful crowd are saying, well, that's only an opinion. St. Robert Bellarmine, St. Alphonsus Liguori say that's only an opinion. But like I've said before, this is of the universal, ordinary magisterium of the church. It is therefore a faith. It is a matter of faith. It is of divine and Catholic faith that a public heretic is incapable of holding any ecclesiastical office. That is a dogma of the universal magisterium. And so when Our Lady speaks of a pope who will be under the power of the devil, she's not talking about a valid pope, but a putative pope. Because a heretic, as is Bergoglio, the third secret reveals the defection of Rome. And this was spoken of already in 1861 as being taught unanimously by the fathers. The fall of Rome, that Rome will completely abandon the faith, that the Catholic Church will appear to have been swept off the face of the earth. The entity that will take its place will be false. It will be counterfeit. And the pope of that counterfeit church will be a counterfeit pope. How will we decide which is the true pope, which is the true church, and which is the false church? And when the true church finally elects a true pope, how will we know the difference between the true pope and the false pope? Again, as St. Robert Bellarmine says, so enlightened was he on this point, that the very form of the church is the profession of the Orthodox faith. And therefore, the Pope cannot have the form of the pontificate unless he has the faith. The form of the church and the form of the papacy are visible in a pope who professes the Catholic faith, the Orthodox Catholic faith, without heresy, without formal heresy. If a man is obstinate in heresy, the form of the pontificate is visibly absent from him. And his church is visibly without the form of the church, and therefore it is not the Catholic Church. The true church is the church that professes the true faith of Christ. These are the words of St. Robert Bellarmine. He sums it up that way. The church that professes the faith, the faith of Christ. So when we see Bergoglio creating a synodal church, it is no longer according to the divine constitution, the monarchical divine constitution under the absolute jurisdiction of the Pope. But when you have a synodal church, that decentralizes ecclesiastical power and puts the final authority of the church to the synods, and the Pope is only a rubber stamp chairman of the board who ratifies what is enacted by the power of the synods. That church is clearly a counterfeit church, and it professes a faith in a human constitution, in a counterfeit constitution of the church. It is a counterfeit church with a counterfeit faith. And that in itself proves that it is a false church. It is not the Catholic Church.
Archbishop Lefebvre used to say there were two churches, the Conciliar Church and the Catholic Church.
Yes, and Bishop Tissier de Malgré wrote an essay explaining formally the distinction between the two churches, the Conciliar Church and the Conciliar Church and the Catholic Church. But the difference coming now with the Synod, and the one who pointed to this was Pope Benedict XVI, when he pointed out an ancient man who was in fact a heretic, but an ancient theologian by the name of Tychonius. And he published an article in the Hera Correspondence, and I downloaded the article. I read it very carefully, and the reason why Pope Benedict singled him out as a great theologian is because he had one great idea, which is it is so fundamentally true, and it so applies to the present situation in the church, that the enemy within the church, they are in their mind, in their soul, spiritually, they are already cut off from the church. As St. John the Apostle says, they are among us, but they are never of us. They were never of us. They were with us. They were with us, but not of us. The heretics, so long as the heresy is not public, obstinate heresy, as long as they don't have the malice of the crime of heresy, they can be seen as dead members of the church. They are still in the church as dead members. Spiritually, they are separated from the church, but they are still accounted as members of the Catholic Church, but dead members of the church. But once their heresy is explicated in such a manner that the malice of pertinacity becomes evident, then that very act separates them from the church. They become a separate organization, a separate communion. They excommunicate themselves and become a separated church, a false church. And this has happened again and again through history, as I've pointed this out for decades. Heresy, this is the natural course of events for heresy. It starts as an error within the body of the church, but the very nature of the church and of heresy is that the heretics expel themselves from the church. They expel themselves from the body of the church. And this is why St. Jerome said, and as Bellarmine points out, St. Robert Bellarmine says that this is taught in unison by the ancient fathers, but it is explained best by St. Jerome that for other crimes, it is the priests who condemn and expel the perpetrators of the crime. But for heresy, the heretics expel themselves. When their pertinacity becomes evident, in other words, when their pertinacity becomes evident, manifested in such a way that it is undeniable that they reject the faith, they are not just making a mistake about how to understand the dogma of faith, but they reject the dogma itself. They try to change the meaning of the dogma to make it mean something else. And it's clear that they're doing this. It's evident. The mens rea is absolutely manifest. Then it is clear that they are outside of the church. They have defected from the Catholic Church. They have defected from the faith, and they're outside of the church. And this was universal. This was unanimously taught by the fathers. explained very explicitly by Saint Jerome. It was pointed out to be unanimous by the unanimous teaching of the fathers by Saint Robert Bellarmine, and that makes it a truth of faith. It is of divine and Catholic faith, and that's the reason why Pope Saint Pius X, when he formulated the Code of Canon Law in 1917, he inserted that provision that all offices whatsoever, from the highest to the lowest, which includes the papacy, all offices from the highest to the lowest are lost automatically by force of the law itself for those who publicly defect from the Catholic faith. Now, it could be argued, well, that's the 1917 Code of Canon Law. It's no longer in effect canonically. Well, that doesn't matter, because it is a dogma of faith. It is a dogma of the universal faith, of the universal and ordinary magisterium of the Church. The ordinary magisterium of the universal Church has taught definitively that those who are public heretics are outside of the Church and they lose all office and all ecclesiastical dignity. That principle was applied in the 39th session, explicitly applied to the case of anti-Pope Benedict XIII, Pedro de Luna, that by his heresy and his schism, even before the Council of Constance pronounced against him, he had already fallen from any office and any ecclesiastical dignity he may have held. That's a truth of faith. And so even canon number 194 in the 1983 Code of Canon Law must be understood in this manner according to the Church's canonical and doctrinal tradition, because it is a truth of faith. And so the only orthodox interpretation, even of the present legislation, it must be understood in the same manner, as it is more explicitly formulated in the 1917 Code. But the 1917 Code, its explicit wording, its clear wording is not to be found in the 1983 Code, because when they formulated the 1983 Code, they wanted to limit it to statutory law and those canons which explained canonical principles and canonical doctrine. They said they determined that is academic, that refers to the canonical tradition of the Church, the canonical doctrine of the Church, so it need not be properly included in the text of the Code of Canon Law. But the 1983 Code makes it very clear that in making interpretation of the Code, in anything that would refer to the old Code, and in order to understand the proper meaning of canon number 194, we have to go back to the 1917 Code, which formulates it according to the Church's canonical doctrine. So, in effect, that law remains in effect, even if it's not as clearly worded in the 1983 Code. That ruling remains in effect because it is a point of divine law. Divine law cannot be changed. It is the law of God, which men cannot change. And that's why the 1917 Code did not strike down that provision of Pope Paul IV, that the election of a heretic is invalid. This was explained by the editor, the general editor of the 1917 Code of Canon Law, Cardinal Pietro Gasparri, explained why they formulated the new code of 1917 in order not to strike down that law, because they understood this is a principle of divine law and they did not have the power to strike that down. So the 1983 Code does not even have the power to strike that down, because it is a provision of divine law that was simply enacted into law by Pope Paul IV and confirmed by Pope St. Pius V. The heretic is not a pope. He is an outsider, as Pope Innocent III said in his teaching, in his magisterial teaching. Pope Innocent III pointed out that the heretic pope is not a pope. He's an alien. He's not in communion with the Church. He's an alien. He is to be condemned. He is to be judged, cast out, like the salt that loses its savor. He is to be cast out and trampled underfoot by men. It's very clear what Pope Innocent III is teaching. So even if a man who is, for all intents and purposes, appears to be pope, he's been elected according to the provisions of canon law, it's later found out that he's a heretic. Or if he should manifest if he should manifest himself to be a heretic, then it's clear that he was never a true pope, because a heretic is incapable. A heretic is incapable of becoming a true pope, and a true pope is incapable of becoming a heretic. And these are truths. These are truths of doctrine that cannot be denied without offending against the Catholic faith, as I've proven in my 2 volumes. So this is how we must understand the third secret of Fatima, when it will finally be revealed. And those who have spoken on the third secret of Fatima, who have read it, have said, there will be the collapse at the center, the words of Father Malachi Martin. There will be the defection of Rome, that Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. We find this, it's for so many Catholics becomes so shocking to say, well, this is against the indefectibility of the church. Well, it can't be. It was taught universally. It was taught unanimously by the ancient fathers. And that's what Cardinal Manning pointed out.
The dubia sent by the 5 cardinals, well, the first one they sent went unanswered. That was several years ago. And then they sent a second one, I think in August of this year. And it's my understanding that the only answers that the Pope, or the one being questioned, in this case, Bergoglio, is able to give or should give is yes or no. And of course, he answered them this time with, sections and subsections and paragraphs and ridiculousness. But where does this lead? Where does the dubia, from where do they go? Where do the cardinals go? Now, Cardinal Burke said he would issue a public correction. So first they start with the dubia, they ask the questions. Then if necessary, he's going to issue a public correction. Then what? Like, where is this going?
There have been, there's already a group of priests and bishops who have issued a very public, solemn correction.
Oh, I didn't see that.
I mentioned, I cover that in my book. I quote it in my book. There's what they call the fraternal correction. That's been made. Any of the cardinals can make further corrections if they like. I have no objection against making corrections. As the scripture says, and quoted by Bellarmine and Ballerini, twice corrected is to be condemned. So corrections have been given once. Let them make a second correction. It only makes the pertinacity of the heresy. It makes the malice of the crime more evident. Bergoglio has taught heresy. The words, the wordings of his propositions are properly heretical. He's being asked to clarify, what is his meaning? Does he mean these things as he's written, because what he says here is heretical? Does he mean it this way or doesn't he? If he's evasive, he refuses to answer, then these non-answers are evident proof of the mens rea, which means his very refusal to answer is an answer. It proves that he indeed is a heretic. He is manifesting the malice of heresy by refusing to answer a question which morally, according to church doctrine and canonically, when a heretic is confronted, when a suspect of heresy is confronted with his own words are heretical. When it is pointed out to him that this is heresy, and it is pointed out to him clearly in such a manner that he cannot deny that it's heresy, he has only one legitimate option, which is to retract his heresy. If he refuses to retract his heresy, then he is to be condemned as a formal heretic. This is the church's canonical tradition. According to all the jurisprudence and canonical doctrine of the church, this is how the case is to be judged. Bergoglio has refused to answer in a matter that strictly requires an answer. He is a suspect of heresy as far as those who have correct. The correction has been issued. He's been accused of formal heresy. He's already been accused of formal heresy.
Right.
But he's been issued a correction. He refuses to clarify and state a profession of Catholic faith. He remains obstinate in holding to his heretical propositions, refusing all correction. He is judged to be incorrigible. Why? Because he has manifested himself to be incorrigible. So there's no longer any question. The man is a formal heretic. After being corrected, the dubia were already a correction in the proper sense of the term, because the dubia presented his propositions, explaining these are heretical. Can you please explain yourself? Then he didn't explain himself. Then the theologians and bishops got together and they said, "You have been corrected in the form of the dubia. You refuse to answer. Now we accuse you of heresy, of formal heresy, and we issue this correction." He spurned that correction. Now, Cardinal Burke and the other cardinals have issued a new formulation of dubia that requires simple yes or no. He refuses to give a simple yes or no. By refusing to answer, he manifests the malice of heresy. That is the mens rea in its evident display. He's made it clear that he is in the malice of the crime of heresy. He refuses to answer a question that he may not refuse to answer. The Catholic doctrine on the Catholic moral teaching, the infallible moral teaching of the Church, says that under such a circumstance, he is obliged to answer. And according to the Catholic churches, according to the Church of Rome, the jurisprudence and canonical tradition, the canonical tradition and jurisprudence of the Roman Church sets forth that one who refuses to answer under those circumstances, therefore, is judged guilty. That he is no longer violently suspect of heresy. He is formal heretic.
So he's been really formally then that since the first dubia, because he refused to answer it. He never did answer them, as far as I know.
He has made his obstinacy persistent. He has persisted in his obstinacy, which makes him beyond all shadow of doubt a formal heretic.
Father, so what is going to happen? Do you think Cardinal Burke is going to lead the cardinals, to restore the church? Are they going to choose a new pope, or is what is going to happen? What did you think? How is Russia will be consecrated?
What will finally become of Jorge Bergoglio if he doesn't undergo miraculous conversion to the Catholic faith? It's rather clear what will happen to him. It will not be a surprise for those who know the Church's teaching on the criteria for judging the truth of the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church, the true Church. What are the characteristic notes? What we I can't remember the English term, the note in Latin. The marks of the Church. Yes, the marks of the Church. We profess usually the 4 marks of the Church, but Bellarmine formulates 15 marks, which are reducible to those 4. And those 4 go back to the Council of Nicaea or Constantinople. I can't remember which at this point. Oh no, the Council of Nicaea, one holy Catholic Apostolic Church. The Nicene Creed, in other words. So those marks, those notes are go back in their explicit formulation to the Council of Nicaea. Those are broken down further into 15 notes by Bellarmine in his book called On the Notes of the Church, De Notis Ecclesiae. And I explained this, I think, in my second volume, not the first volume, that would be in the second volume. De Notis Ecclesiae, yes, in the second volume, in my second volume on the case against Bergoglio. One of the notes of the true Church is the horrible end of the Church's enemies, how they come to a terrible, horrific end. the heresiarch Arius, during the day of his triumph, began to feel ill. He went into a back alley to relieve himself, and he, how should I say, he excreted his own entrails.
Oh, jeez.
He died on the spot.
Wow.
Look at the horrible death of Voltaire, the horrible death of Lenin. They died the most horrible, miserable death of utter despair. Look at the death of John Calvin, who died cursing his own life, cursing his life, and cursing his work. Look at the death of King Henry VIII, who is dying. In his dying words, he said, "So this is how it ends, and all is lost." Bergoglio speaks of the God of surprises. For those of us who know that this is one of the marks of the church, the horrible end of the church's enemies, or the terrible end that awaits Jorge Bergoglio will be no surprise. But for Bergoglio, as he himself says, God is the God of surprises, and God has a surprise for him. It's a horrible end, and God has a surprise for him. So on the day of his triumph, he can't hope to escape the judgment of God any differently than the heresiarch Arius, the great heretic who denied the divinity of Christ, the way he died so miserably, excreting his own entrails. Such a similar fate awaits Jorge Bergoglio, who was a greater enemy of the church than even Arius. Because with one synod that extends over years, as I said in other interviews, Bergoglio is attempting to alter the divine constitution of the church, and in so doing, his reforms are not true reforms. They are a revolution. In enacting his reforms, he does the same thing as they attempted to do at the Protestant Reformation, is to reform the Catholic Church out of existence. But he is usurping the throne of Peter in order to exert this power over the whole church. Whereas Calvin and Luther and Henry VIII, their power was only territorial and local. They could not extend their power, their dictatorship, their false authority over the whole church the way Bergoglio is attempting to do. And therefore, they cannot have that global universal effect of bringing about the great apostasy, a global apostasy, where it will appear that the church, as Cardinal Manning said, with the testimony of all the ancient fathers, that the church will appear to have been, the Catholic Church will appear to have been swept off the face of the earth. There will be a counterfeit church in the place of the materially taking over the infrastructure, the Vatican, all those diocesan corporations and such that are under the spiritual jurisdiction of the church. They are being hijacked and taken over by these pirates. These pirates who are defecting from the church. They are leaving the church and they are creating a new church, but they are in an act of piracy. They are claiming the name of the Catholic Church, the human institutions of the Catholic Church, the corporations that give civil legal standing to the diocese, to the Vatican City State, and things like this. These are not divine institutions, but they are under the spiritual divine institution of ecclesiastical power conferred on Peter and his successors and on the apostles and their successors. That this great usurpation is taking place. It is an act of usurpation. It is a false and counterfeit church that is now coming into being. We are seeing Protestant Reformation number 2 taking place. The consummation of the Reformation of the 16th century is now taking place. The 16th century Reformation is being consummated universally by the greatest Protestant heresiarch of all time, Jorge Mario Bergoglio.
Father, John Venari had put together a little pamphlet called, or a little booklet, I should say, called The Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita, I think it was called. I have it here somewhere over here, but I have called Bergoglio that from day one. He's the Pope of the Alta Vendita. It's so obvious. I mean, the goal for these Freemasons was to get their man on the throne of Peter, and by usurpation, obviously. Would you say, well, some have accused him of being a Freemason. I mean, I have no proof to that except for his behavior.
Well, I know from a certain cardinal, I can't mention names, of course, that there is the evidence is there that he is in fact a Freemason. There's no doubt. From what was said and heard, there's absolute no doubt. It's beyond all shadow of doubt. But I can't speak openly about this at the moment. Let it suffice to say that he is indeed a Freemason. He receives his orders. He's under obedience directly to the what they call the Venerable Master and the Grand Master of the lodge in Buenos Aires. So Catholic people think that he's the visible head of their church, and they don't realize that he's the visible head, not even the visible head of. He is the invisible head of the Catholic Church, of course, is Jesus Christ. The visible head is the true Pope. Bergoglio is only a visible head in one sense, but there is an invisible head, which is the Grand Master of Freemasonry, the Supreme Councils of Freemasonry. That's the synodal power behind the synodal church, the Supreme Councils of Freemasonry. And yes, indeed, he is a Mason. The church that he's creating is Masonic. But the reforms in the liturgy that already took place at Vatican II, these were formulated already in the 1920s by Freemasonry. That organization with that strange name, the Alta Vendita, it was given that name to sound like some kind of a commercial organization. That was for security reasons, to protect this, because it's a very subversive organization. They had to give it some innocuous name that appears to have something to do with business, merely commercial, merely business. But of course, it was a Masonic institution whose purpose was to infiltrate the church and to corrupt the minds of churchmen, of seminarians, of churchmen, of prelates, in order to overturn the divine constitution of the church and create a counterfeit church. And this is outlined in so many Masonic documents. I've touched upon them in my 2 volumes. And in the Devil's Final Battle, my book that I wrote in collaboration with Father Gruner and others, we quoted Canon Roca, an apostate priest who foretold the day that there would be this ecumenical council to bring about this revolution in the church. Now, the Alta Vendita, already in 1824, to show you how long they've been working for this revolution, already in 1824, the man who was in charge of the Alta Vendita, he went under the nom de guerre of Nubius, and his real name is in the Vatican secret archives. His real name is there, preserved in the Vatican secret archives. He was succeeded by I'm trying to think of the name. It'll come to me. But it is a Masonic society, and already in 1824, it was reported to Nubius that they were having unforeseen success in corrupting the minds of seminarians and young priests and getting the younger clergy to buy into these Masonic ideas. And by 1917, they were more bold about saying that Satan will rule from the Vatican, the Pope will be his slave.
Yeah, that's
Pope Benedict the 16th, the power ends at that door. Nubius, in charge of the Alta Vendita, said this will be a revolution in cope and mitre.
that's it.
That they will get a man to their own liking to become Pope. But even he could not foresee that they would get their own man installed as an anti-pope who would usurp the throne of Peter. They weren't expecting this, but this was foretold by Pope Leo XIII in his original long prayer to St. Michael, where he said, there where St. Peter established the see of the truth, there they have set up the throne of abominable iniquity.